everyone, and welcome to this month's client seminar on lift maintenance in multi-unit developments. Our guest speaker today is Garrett Fanning, General Manager with Otis Elevator Ireland. Garrett worked with Otis for the past 7 years in Ireland in both the new equipment and service side of the business. Prior to that, he worked as sales director for an Irish startup company and previously spent 12 years in the UK and Europe working in sales and marketing. Garrett's talk will cover different lift types, common breakdown issues, what needs maintenance, what doesn't, planned preventive maintenance, how to extend the lifespan, and the different types of maintenance contracts, how we go about upgrading lifts and what the options are, and the use of analog lines versus GPS technology. I'd like to thank Garrett for his time and look forward to his presentation.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Good afternoon. Just going to touch in terms of from a housekeeping point of view and just give you a small introduction for 1 or 2 minutes in terms of the Otis Ireland business and where that fits into Otis UK and our mother company United Technologies Corporation. As Paul has touched on, we'll go through the topics that he's asked me to address this afternoon. Otis Limited is part of United Technologies Corporation. So these small pictures that you have here of astronauts in suits, etc., aren't pertinent or relevant to Otis, but our sister companies include Sikorsky Helicopters, Carrier Refrigeration. It's a large technology organisation. And they've also designed the spacesuits that go up with for NASA. This large test tower is approximately 60 stories high and is based in our manufacturing facility in Tokyo. And that test tower is basically used for our high-rise development, etc. And that just gives you an example of the Burj Khalifa building, which is the second highest building in the world, that has Otis elevators that both go vertically and also go horizontally. So it's a large organisation. There's over 288,000 employees, and in Ireland specifically, we have about 110 years' experience. Worldwide, Otis about 2.4 million units. They maintain approximately 1.8, and we're in 200 territories. Ireland is important for the O'Dwyer client base to have an understanding of our overhead and our structure. 3 offices, Belfast, Cork and Dublin. We have national coverage which goes across the entire country with resident or what we call route engineers that cover all call-outs 24/7. And across our 60-odd engineers we would have approximately 1,200 years of experience. They tend to spend a long time with us. Last week I was giving out pins for 45 years service. So a lot of our engineers would have left school, come in as apprentices and worked the whole way through. So a vast amount of experience within the engineer base, which is important when you're looking to maintain equipment, older equipment, extend the life of equipment, and also to fault find and troubleshoot on equipment. We have 3 key absolutes to notice. This is just, again, very quickly we'll touch on it and we'll get into the core topics. Safety is a key absolute for us because we have, obviously, being a lift engineer is an extremely hazardous occupation. Globally, there are deaths every year. We've had 4 or 5 deaths in Brazil and India and the subcontinent so far, not Otis, but within the overall industry. So safety is a key prerequisite for us and our staff, that they come home safe at the end of every working day, and also for the O'Dwyer clients that there aren't injuries on site or there isn't bad publicity that engineers aren't trained accordingly in safety. So these facts and figures you can ignore more or less completely, but the bottom and the underlying trend is here that working within the Otis Group is significantly better than the industry standard, and we have fewer accidents than any other lift company, and we're very proud of that. Ethics is another consideration that we have given the current environment that we're working in. So all of our employees take quarterly training on ethics, particularly conflicts of interest. Again, important for our clients and for our clients' clients, so that they have an understanding that we are working in an ethical manner. And finally, financial controls. That's important, obviously, that we report correctly, we report accurately, particularly, again, with in the current environment and the recession that we're currently in, that our results are correct and accurate, and that we're here in the short term, the medium term, and the long term, and that is our aim. So, getting on to the product types. There are three main product types in lifts. The first is a hydraulic. Hydraulic lift is basically a lift whereby it goes back from the 1960s to 2000. There's a lot of them still in operation. They are using a technology whereby you've got a single ram going down the side of the building. So it's cantilevered off one side. This tank here is full of oil, and the oil and the rope basically forces the ram up to move the lift in an upward and downward direction. It normally only should really be in buildings of around 4/5 stops. It's old technology. It's no longer being used. We haven't installed it to a hydraulic lift in the last 13 years. In terms of maintenance regime, you're looking at 6 visits probably, minimum. You've got callback rates of around 4 to 6 visits. You can have rogue units where you could have 12 visits, 12 callbacks a year. They require a machine room, and sometimes when you walk into an apartment block where they're being overextended and you smell that sort of burnt oil smell, you can sometimes smell burnt oil off a machine room around near the lift, that's a hydraulic. The ride quality is quite spongy, particularly as you go up towards the top floors, because the oil pressure is falling across the entire length of the ram. There are technical issues with it. There aren't a huge amount of hydraulic lifts in the O'Dwyer portfolio. Very few. Very, very few. So it's a technology that's slightly outdated, and we would be fairly careful about taking this type of technology on without doing a full survey. Re-roping is an issue every 7 to 10 years. The door operating technology can be obsolete. Similarly with landing and car fixtures, and the levelling accuracy, as I said before, isn't great. Moving on, the traction lift replaced the hydraulic lift, and it's a large amount of traction lifts, several of them on portfolio in different sites across the O'Dwyer portfolio. Machine room again, no hydraulic tank or valve block. It's basically a controller there, machine. That's the top of your slab, and it all goes down into the shaft here. You've got guide rails on either side, and then you have ropes going back up over the top, and then a counterweight here. So the counterweight and the lift will move in opposite directions, and the controller, this blue box up here, is the brains of the lift. Good reliability, good levelling accuracy, better technology. The machine is a geared machine, so you have brake assemblies, gears, cogs, lots of moving parts. So they can last. We have one particular traction lift that we were servicing up to 45 years. That is an exception. The engineering is normally quite good in terms of the type of the guides, the sling, the car. It's heavy, robust engineering. This is the part up here that can be a little bit problematic, coming into sort of the 15 to 20 years life cycle. The major issue again is the moving parts in terms of the machine, and after 15 years you should really be looking at sinking funds or some type of fund to look to modernise the lift to increase availability. Door operators again, single speed, quite clunky, and levelling accuracy is around 5 mil, and obviously lubrication is required. So with these lifts you have to re-rope as well. And re-roping means that you could have the lift down for 1 day, 2 days, and it's quite a costly exercise. The cost of a re-rope on a 3-4 stop lift would be somewhere in the region of 4K. That's obviously depending on what type of contract you're on. Traction lifts are what we call MRL lifts, machine roomless lifts, which is the vast majority of the O'Dwyer portfolio, is the most modern technology. We call our MRLs Gen 2. We have a lot of patented technology that's associated with the Gen 2. At the height of the boom, we were installing somewhere in the region of approximately 450, 500 units per annum. To give you an idea of how quickly that boom has gone, and we all know it is, we installed approximately 15 last year. So that gives you an idea of where the market's at in terms of construction. Reliability and availability is the really strong selling points of these lifts, particularly the Gen 2. You're looking at an average callback rate currently of about 1.5 per annum, so that's 1.5 breakdowns per annum. They require no more than quarterly maintenance visits, and the type of machine and type of equipment that's in with them is very modern. It's a permanent magnetic machine, so it's a tiny little coil, magnetic coil, no moving parts. So if the machine breaks down, you take the machine out, you walk downstairs to the van, pick up a new machine, put it back in again. So in terms of downtime for major repairs, it's a lot less. Variable frequency door operators give you greater reliability on the doors. And we have to say that with lifts, depending on the type of building or the type of site that you're in, the largest number of callbacks or breakdowns are around the doors. People holding open the doors, dirt getting caught in the tracks, people moving into apartments upstairs and putting a bin in the way and the lift shutting down. So doors are a big problem. So the better the door operator and the more reliable it is, the fewer number of breakdowns you're going to have. It also has flat belt technology, which is a patented technology, so the ropes are gone. And we have a flat belt technology, and currently under HSA recommendations where we don't have to change them from anywhere between 10 to 15 years subject to the usage. So again, less downtime on the lift, no lubrication required, and we have what we call as REM. You'll have to excuse me for my three-letter acronyms. It's a disease within Otis. We seem to have them everywhere, but it means remote elevator monitoring. So I'll touch on that later on. Paul has asked me to touch on that. But we have the ability now to do software upgrades and remote diagnostics and remote intervention on these lifts as well. That's the product technology. From your client's point of view and from your point of view in terms of contracts and contract cover, what are the most essential issues that we need to consider? The type of equipment is really important. So in terms of contracts, the industry standards are comprehensive, semi-comprehensive, and basic. Now, depending on the service provider and the supplier, any scope of works can fall into those three categories. It's a very grey area. Our fully comprehensive contract is a fully comprehensive contract. Other service providers, it includes all parts due to fair wear and tear. The only thing that where you may get calls for invoicing would be for misuse and abuse or power failure or something along those lines. So other service providers may exclude re-ropes, may exclude machines, may exclude controllers, etc. So it's important that people look through the terms and conditions of the contracts, understand the contracts, what scope is covered, what parts are covered. So in terms of the manufacture of the equipment, how robust is it? What I would say about contracts, basically, it's not too dissimilar to managing an insurance policy. It's how you manage your risk on your equipment. So for us, we like to think that our fully comprehensive signature contract is like giving the client an insurance contract saying that we will manage all the risk on that equipment. We have introduced a semi-comprehensive contract in the last 18 months to compete on the market because a lot of other service providers wouldn't include certain scopes, so we'd like to make sure that we're competing and we're comparing apples with apples. So the major issues to address are reliability, the age of the equipment, part availability, is there obsolescence, sinking funds. For example, if it's in the first 5 years of the development's life, would you want to look at maybe looking at a basic contract and then upgrading to semi-comp and comp as the lifts get older? It's how you manage your risk. And then obviously the capabilities of the lift company or other lift companies, as the case may be, to modernise the equipment. In terms of the contracts and where we find what are the most important key performance indicators for the clients, whether they be in apartments or whether they be in commercial, retail, residential, its response times to call-outs, the availability of the lift, chargeable calls. What are chargeable calls? What are the rates during normal working hours? What are the rates outside of normal working hours? What parts are included? What parts are excluded? And then obviously the reporting function and features, paperwork, etc. Another issue that should be taken into consideration, given the current market, is the service provider structure. How many engineers do they have? Do they have engineers on call 24/7? Do they have their own call center, or is it outsourced? Et cetera, et cetera. So, for example, if it's a smaller operation and they only have 2 or 3 engineers on the road, if there's a trapping in one development, how are they going to get another engineer to another development? So it is important that you look at the company structure and you look at those key performance indicators when considering contracts. This is very busy, but basically what I've done here is I have put in a full list of the scope of works that we have. These are on our contracts, so that there's no grey area. A basic contract, a semi-comprehensive contract, and a fully comprehensive contract. So it talks about major components, minor components, lubrication, preventative maintenance, what's included, what's excluded. So it goes down to the smallest things like relays, ropes, controllers, valve blocks, etc., etc. And then the inclusions in terms of the breakdown assistance, breakdown response times, and entrapment response times as well. So this sheet here should give any property manager or any client or any apartment owner some peace of mind in terms of what's covered in the contract. And as I say, one has to weigh up the cost-benefit analysis of how you manage your risk. Modernisation, in terms of the equipment that we have within the O'Dwyer portfolio, I'd say the vast majority of it is very young. It's very modern, it's very reliable, and it's state-of-the-art. A lot of the developments that we've put lifts into from a notice perspective would have the Gen 2 technology. But for those that don't, one has to look at modernisation. When does one modernise? It depends on the age of the equipment, the reliability of the lift equipment, what usage it gets, etc. But we have people within our organisation who are able to do full surveys and do full modernisation proposals across those 3 product ranges. So we have a specific modernisation programme for all of those. So we can upgrade the equipment, or alternatively, if the equipment is too old, we can rip the old equipment out and put a new lift in. So why modernise? The main reasons for modernisation are as above: safety, performance, aesthetics, comfort, efficiency. For me, the most important one is availability. If the lift is becoming a troublesome unit, well then it is essential to modernise. So like I said, we have a modernisation pack for each individual one, whereby we can get rid of the old technology and put in the new Gen 2 technology. Similarly, we can get rid of the old hydraulic and put in Gen 2 technology, and we can do a traditional Gen 2 mod, or we can do a complete replacement. When you modernise, what benefits do you get? Well, in terms of energy efficiency, if it's a geared machine, you can get up to 75% increase, or beg your pardon, reduction in your power utilisation. From going to a regen drive, which I'll come on to you now, from a geared machine onto a regen drive with a permanent magnetic machine. And I have a case study here to show that. Similarly, in terms of the lighting, even in terms of the lifts, we have packs. You don't have to wait for modernisation. We have upgrade packs as well that can reduce your lighting, whereby the motions will take the lights out, and a motion sensor will take the lights out if the lift is unoccupied, and you can get about 80% saving on your lighting. So just a note on that, you don't have to wait for that to happen. In terms of case studies, so you're looking at dynamic improvements of wire quality, equipment availability, and a significant reduction in energy consumption. So in terms of ride quality, you're looking at about 8 milligrams, from going from 20 to 8 milligrams in terms of stopping distances, and you're reducing your calls by up to, it depends, but on average for the older technology, certainly approximately 5 calls per annum, and a massive reduction in energy consumption. New technology within the lift industry is constantly investing in our product. I touched on the flat belt. This is what I mean by the flat belt. These wire tensils have there's a much greater strength to them. There's less potential for what we call rouging or rusting. The fibre is breaking within the belt. There's a greater surface area of the belt on the actual lift sheave. So it gives you a longer life. It's quieter, particularly in apartments because it's polyurethane coated. And again, a large majority of the O'Dwyer portfolio would have this technology here. So you get a longer life, less downtime, and a quieter lift. Regen is important because this can also be retrofitted to certain models of lift. If you look at the arrangement here of the lift car and the counterweight, as the lift moves, the power usage moves in opposite directions. So if you've got a full lift car or an empty lift car, it depends on how much usage you obviously have. Obviously with a full lift car you've more usage. With an empty lift car you don't. But the regen drive basically takes away the old technology and puts in a new technology which allows you to actually drive power back into the grid. So for example, if the lift is empty and the counterweight is coming back down, that additional energy, for a start, it won't use any power. It'll just use the counterweight and the force of gravity, and then the electricity that generates is then driven back into your grid. So you're looking at approximately 50% energy saving, and it also takes away, in terms of the old machines and the older machine rooms, it takes away a lot of the excess buildup of heat that you get, or the necessity for you to have air conditioning in machine rooms as well. And it's quite an easy installation. And you can see the savings visibly on the actual controller, if you want to go into control rooms and look at controllers. So it's a fairly new technology. It's on all of our recent installations. It's come as standard, so it's already there from about 2004. But it can be retrofitted to the Gen 2 technology prior to that, from about 1995 onwards. Case study there shows you a job site there where you were looking at 106.2 degrees on one machine room in the Hong Kong job site, and that was reduced down to 29.2. And you were looking at about approximate savings there of 30% and 32%. We've installed this technology in a lift in the Irish Financial Services Centre, and by doing the modernisation and putting in the Gen 2 equipment as opposed to gear equipment, they've been running a meter now for the last 2 weeks, and they're getting 72% energy saving on their equipment. Compass is destination control, useful for multi-unit sites where you've got many lifts. It basically means that the lifts are used in a more efficient manner. You've probably seen it. It's more geared towards high-rise and might not have a huge application within the residential market. Elite service is something that we're fairly proud of. It's a state-of-the-art patented technology. It goes back to the another three-letter acronym, or REMS, or what we call our remote elevator monitoring systems. And it allows us to interface with the lift remotely. So you could have an engineer, we have 5 elite engineers in the UK, and they can go onto their laptops, and they can basically go onto the laptops and do a full diagnostic of a lift. So where we had a problematic lift, a Gen 2 lift, you're able to call him up. He's able to look at the lift, go up and down the shaft, drive the lift, take control of the lift, release passengers, and then remotely intervene with the lift. In London Olympics, we had 452 calls on the equipment, and over 2 weeks, 60% of those calls were resolved remotely. So no engineer had to go to site. We were able to go on, interrogate the lift, fix the lift, put the lift back in service without any engineer being on site. And this is extremely advantageous for those sites where you have, in the more remote areas, where availability and uptimes, and also for entrapments. So they're able to release passengers in the event of entrapments. And the average fixed time was 25 minutes. So it's fairly advanced technology. We also then have, in terms of a new innovations, we have what we call e-service, which is an online reporting tool. And that can be for each site, where you can get all of the information in real time for maintenance, for callbacks, for entrapments, etc., etc. So it breaks down into 6 different spreadsheets. You can manipulate how you present the data, but you can't manipulate the data. And the data is fed in from our service visit reports and our maintenance regimes. This is a subject that was conscious at the time. Autodialers versus REM. Like I said, a lot of other suppliers will have a generic autodialer. We have what we call REM. The difference is basically an autodialer is what it says in this tin. It's a glorified telephone. REM is a £100 million monitoring device that we've invested in. And what REM does, basically, it talks to that autodialer, that REM unit talks to that blue box in the lift. And we're able to interrogate the data that comes from it. On a lot of the multi-unit sites that we have, previously, the lift code and lift standard EN81, which is a very strict code, calls for an independent, dedicated analogue line to run to each lift. That code or that standard hasn't changed. And actually, if you look at the mobile phone and the SIM cards, they're saying that mobile phones should not be used or should not be relied upon in case of emergency. So the analogue line that we put into our lifts is still relevant. We have to have that there at time of handover when we test and hand over the lift under EN81 and under notified body approval. That has to be done with an analogue line. Now there is potential for future developments in this area. We are trialling at the moment a GSM option that also allows us to both talk and interrogate the lift at the same time, which is essential for our REM, our remote elevator monitoring. When this technology comes in and we have 100% certainty that we can get reception in mass concrete shafts, which is what most of our shafts are made of, reception in these shafts is normally very, very poor. We are trialling them at the moment. We have trials ongoing in the UK, which will mean that we should hopefully be coming into the market Q4 of this year, first quarter of next year, an option that will allow us to get away from the analogue line, the line rentals. We know they're costly, we know they're expensive, we know there's something that are a bone of contention because sometimes the lines can be cut off by the service providers and there's a grey area as to whose responsibility it is. I would say that the remote elevator monitoring unit also sends out a 3-day ping to the lines to make sure that the lines are still intact. And that's also part of EN81, the new standards. On some of the older equipment, the standards and the codes are not as advanced. So that's why you'll walk into some buildings and you'll see a bell and there's no telephone because it was put in at a time before the modern standards were introduced. So we hope and we are working very hard to bring an option to you in relation to taking out the analogue lines. What we're going to try and do is, so that we can wrap it up in a turnkey proposal, is to work with it in terms of the RAM. It's currently going through Passport 4, which is part of our world-wide site safety system, and it's currently being trialled in 18 different locations in the UK at the moment, and we're at 100%. So I think they're looking to try and maybe do 6 to 8 more weeks before we look at putting a product on the market. And this will allow you to get rid of the lines. What we hope to try and do is to put the 3G and the GSM into one call for the modems to handle as usual, and then just do a turnkey package for the client so that they don't have to worry about it. And there will be cost savings on that. So that's the end of my presentation, half an hour. For any assistance or any questions, I'll try and answer what I can now. If you have any further information that you'd like to get from us in more detail, our telephone number is there. And thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. Thank you.
You mentioned, Gareth, about the autodialers and that that happens quite a lot where if they go on to private numbers with some operators, it won't ring through to the call centre. Is it possible to do a REM installation where there's an existing just a normal telephone line? Is it quite expensive to do that?
No, we have what we call a REM light package. So as long as we've got an analogue line, what we've encountered sometimes when we take on new units, they have digital lines. And different telephone companies or telecommunication companies will offer digital converters. They aren't reliable. So if you have an analog line, absolutely we can retrofit what we call a REM light. Now, you won't get the functionality of Elite or the remote diagnostics because you don't have the Otis controller, if it's not an Otis controller, because those two basically talk to each other. But you will get all the functionality of the other REM, so the 3-day pings and all that type of stuff, absolutely. And the REM will basically give you lists, it will go from the first number down to the 10th number. So if it doesn't get through to the first number, it goes to the second number, goes to the third number, until we actually get two-way communication. So yeah, there is something that we can put out. There's different grades of what we call REM. We have REM Lite, REM 3, REM 5, and there's a REM 6 coming out now. So absolutely, it can be retrofitted.
So, and is that affected by the phone lines often will be transferred onto a private number status where the call centres can't receive call from a private number? Is that affect the REM, or does the ping do away with that?
No, if it's a private number, I mean, as long as the line and the auto dialer or REM is able to get a two-way communication. When you say private number, now, just in terms of? Just
in terms of the telephone operator would change the number to a private number, that the caller ID isn't given out by the phone line.
Okay.
So that has been a problem in the past where the phone, the call centre haven't been able to receive the calls because they can't ID the...
They can't ID the unit, yeah. Well, what we try and do, and that's why you have in the lift car, if it's a Otis lift, you'll have a little badge, translucent badge as well, which gives you the unit number, the year of manufacture as well. So when you do go through to the call centre, you can identify the unit. Once that goes through into our system, then we'll have full traceability of the unit, where it is, what block it's in, the development, etc., etc. So that helps us and assists us. But with the REM, normally if it's a REM 5 on the more modern stuff, and for most of your developments you have the Gen 2 technology, which is the modern technology. So most of them are elitable, so we're, at this stage now we're sometimes doing remote diagnostics before we send the engineer out, so that when he's going out he knows what the fault is before he goes. So, yeah.
So if you do need to replace the lift, how long will a project like that actually take?
It depends. I mean, for modernisation, for a Gen 2 modernisation that we were talking there, where you have a machine room, if it's a 4-stop lift, you don't have to take the whole lift out. My preference is to modernise. The reason I say that is because it's less disruptive to the client in the building. You don't have builders, we don't have massive buildings. If you can keep the landing doors and they're in a good state, you can keep the car, you can keep the sling, you can keep the guides. It's good, strong technology. It's actually probably more robust engineering than the modern day engineering. And you modernise the problematic bits, which is the hall fixtures, the landing fixtures, the car fixtures, the machine, the controller. So for a 4-stop lift, you'd be looking at a program of approximately 3 weeks and 1 week for handover, with no rip out and no builder's work. If it's a full replacement, you're looking at a replacement of a week. Builders going in, because you're then taking the landing doors out, you've got to put partitions up. So increased costs, so your program would probably be nearer to 6 to 7 weeks. So for 4 or 5 stop lifts, where you can modernise, it's approximately, I'd say, 2/3 of the cost and half the program. But for a 4-stop lift, modernisation 4 weeks, full replacement probably 6, 7.
Garrett, just on the newer technology, suggested that there was quite substantial energy savings.
Yeah.
What's the typical energy cost of an average lift? And then to install the new technology, what's the sort of cost and payback period?
It really depends on the size of the lift, Paul, and I'm not trying to be awkward here in terms of it, and that's why we have to do case studies lift by lift. For a standard 8-person lift with the old gear, sort of geared technology, it could be pulling. What I can do is I'll take that offline and I'll come back to you with an actual case study for an 8-person 6-stop lift gearless, because it also depends on the daytime rate, the nighttime rate, and the utilisation. So I'll do a case study. I know they have been doing case studies, but I know that in terms of the retrofitting the actual cost, I'll put together a little case study with the cost of the regen drive and a before and after, and I'll send that through to you.
Just in relation to the last question, I mean, typically what's the cost of an installation versus a replacement, and what sort of lifespan would you expect to get on your lifts?
On our lifts, on the Gen 2, we hold a warranty of about 20 years. So standard lifts, 20 years. If they're maintained correctly, you should get longer than that. For cost-wise, new lifts, you'd be looking at probably 4-stop, 5-stop, depending on, again, the specification that you are looking for. If it's top of the range, you'd be looking probably at about 40k for a new lift. Then you've got to factor in your rip-out costs, and you've got to factor in your builder's work, which could add anywhere between 15 to 25k on top of that. For a modernisation programme for a 4-stop equivalent, you'd be looking probably in the region of around 40k tops. So that's why I say it's that 40 versus 60 type of ballpark budget costs, subject to what you wanted in the specification, the finishes you want, etc.
Modernisation would give you another 20 years.
Yeah.
Life.
Basically what we've done is we've designed a package that takes the new equipment technology and allows us to retrofit that new equipment technology to the older technology. So we basically we replace the problematic parts, leave the robust engineering in place, and it gives you a similar warranty. So absolutely, we've found on some projects where there are fully comprehensive contracts and they're sort of 25 years old, by even offering a cost of the maintenance after modernisation, that in the first 5 years the savings on maintenance alone will pay for about 50%, 60% of the modernisation. So just purely the savings on the maintenance regime post-modernisation, if you've got high values historically, can actually contribute half to 60% of the actual modernisation cost, which in those terms is relatively a no-brainer. It's the right thing to do. But again, we would do that specifically for each development if that was required, if that was requested. Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay. Thank you very much.